there are many travel photography tip videos out there with tips that are pretty banal. Things like know your camera, research your location, or bring a tripod. Really? I mean, in today's day and age, that stuff is obvious. Not gonna touch any of that here. This video is about 7 travel photography tips that you have not commonly heard.
Hey, I'm Mitchell. For the past decade, I've been living my dream, journeying around the world as a professional travel photographer. During this time, I've seen and I've learned a lot. And now I want to share the knowledge with you. Come along on the journey.
So, I am back in Georgia and I have found some new ruins. These are not ancient ruins like from the last video from Armenia. These are ruins from the Soviet times, but it's pretty quiet here. The light is nice and soft. Good place to make this sort of video.
Now, in this area called Tskhaltubo, there are all these abandoned Soviet resorts. People live in some of them. That's right, some of these former resorts are homes to refugees from the Abkhazia War, which took place over 20 years ago. Lots of stories there. I've met some of the inhabitants. A while ago, I hung out with one and photographed him. So I've been to this area before and now I've come back.
Okay, so the first unusual travel photography tip is allow yourself to be naive. This tip applies in particular to people photography. Sometimes it's best to throw out all of your knowledge and supposed wisdom. So many things can put you off and prevent you from even taking the camera out of your bag. It makes practical sense to get into this pure, innocent, childlike or naive state of mind. A large part of my early work focused on people. It was made purely because I had this kind of approach.
I was genuinely fascinated by whoever I photographed, by what they did. I wanted to capture it all in a respectful manner, regardless of what was happening in front of the lens. So in my mind, perhaps naively, I thought that there was no reason why anyone would not want to be photographed by me. Some of my naivety was killed after traveling to countries like Morocco and even my native Belarus.
They are much less friendly to people photography. But I've learned that even there, unless you're absolutely certain of a negative result, which is rare that you're absolutely certain, it helps to be naive. I am sure that you have done something naively, without prior knowledge, without thinking much, and then after you had a chance to reflect, you thought, how did I do that? You might have even thought, I know better than to do that now. But it's not better because you wouldn't have had the image. So naivety can be a very useful state of mind to get things done. Of course, if it's a dangerous kind of place, then it's common sense that you don't try any of this stuff. Just down the road, there is another building that I think is more visually interesting than this one. I'm gonna film the rest of this video around there.
Also not too far from here is the mining town of Chiatura. I just visited it again too. Some of the first cable cars that are still functioning since the Soviet times. Many dilapidated Soviet buildings. This is actually connected to one of the tips that I'll talk about later on. But yeah, this whole area is fascinating in an unusual way, which is fitting for unusual travel photography tips. I'll be showing you bits of this region throughout the video. So I am in the other building now. There's a bit more to it. Of course, it is also completely falling apart. Look at this. If something falls on my head, thank you for supporting this YouTube channel. You've been a lovely audience. Unusual travel photography tip number 2. The main event is often not the main thing photographically.
Now, let me make it clear. Sometimes the main event is just amazing photographically. A camel race in Mauritania, the Christmas ceremony in Lalibela, or a procession commemorating a saint in Sicily. All amazing. However, often this is not the case. At the Koyoriti festival, which I talked about in depth in a past video, link on the screen, one of the main events was the bringing of the cross down from the snow-capped mountain peak.
It was not very interesting photographically, not in comparison to what led up to it. Scenes of people lighting candles, waiting for the sun to rise and for the cross to come down. These are traditional Indian wrestlers. Photos from their training sessions. The main event was the day of the wrestling matches. It was great, but photographically, at the trainings there were so many more creative possibilities. For me, the trainings were far more attractive and more important photographically. So the main event is what everybody expects to be the spectacle, what everyone comes for. Sometimes it is amazing, oftentimes the stuff around it is far more interesting from a photographic standpoint. Keep this in mind. I suggest that you always look for what's interesting around the main event. This idea can be extended to almost any event, gathering, or spectacle. Another example, markets. Here are some scenes that I shot before a cattle market in Colombia really started. These are my favorite photos from the day. There was nothing that matched them during the hours of the market, the main event. Even if the main event is what's most amazing, most incredible photographically, by shooting around it, you end up with more interesting images. And there might be more photographic opportunities and sometimes more freedom too. Unusual travel photography tip number 3. There won't be a next time. This is one of the most important tips for the photographer on the move. Out of all the tips that I mentioned here, I feel that this is the one that I need to follow much more myself. To really indoctrinate myself with the idea that I must take advantage of my photographic opportunities because there won't necessarily be a next time. I guess I am spoilt by photographic opportunities. I come across so many interesting scenes. I meet fascinating characters all the time. Partly because I usually travel by car. Opportunities just keep presenting themselves. So it's become easy to make excuses not to make photos, to say next time because I'm not in the right frame of mind, I have to rush to be somewhere, stuff like that. And sometimes there is a next time. A landscape or a building isn't going anywhere, but the light is, certainly people are, and things just don't come together all the time. I have a good, fairly recent example. I photographed this fish seller along a road in Armenia. I made the photo the first time that I traveled on this road, and then I drove there 2 more times on 2 different occasions. The next time I saw him, it was cloudy, the colors weren't as vibrant, he wasn't dressed the same way, the scene was uninspiring. The last time I saw his car, it was further up the road, but I didn't see him at all. Even if this man regularly sells fish along the same road, the photo opportunity was completely gone after the first time. So I'm not sure how you feel about this, but probably, like me, you can't actually remember regretting taking the time to stop, to wait for a photo, whether it was along a road, on the street, or in someone's house. The thing is, even if you don't get that amazing photo, you'll often walk away with a pleasant memory, sometimes even a valuable life lesson. A quick word from my sponsor, myself. If you want more in-depth travel photography tips, both unusual and usual, check out my video course. In it, I go behind the scenes of my award-winning photos. I break down all the creative decisions in great detail. I post-process the photos in front of you and even give you the raw files so that you can follow along. If you're the kind of person who likes learning from practical, actionable advice, then you'll find my course very useful. Unusual travel photography tip number 4. When the weather's bad, run for your camera. Usually, when we think travel photography, we don't imagine dark, cloudy skies, grey, wet scenes, sudden snowfall along the road you're traveling, or really thick fog that envelops the entire landscape. And when we think about rain and bad weather, we generally don't think about photography. We want our gear kept somewhere safe and dry. But conditions like these create some great visual drama and scenes that are really real, I guess, unidealized. They show a side of life and travel which isn't represented anywhere nearly as often as scenes shot during beautiful sunsets or sunrises. Part of it is because there are technical limitations. Most cameras are not waterproof. I have a couple which are water resistant, but even so, I can't just walk around with them for hours under heavy rain. Regardless of the limitations, I find ways and I make a point of shooting as much as I can in these situations. I try to take advantage of them rather than avoid them. And I think that you should too. The resulting photos can be quite evocative, even poetic sometimes, and they will be different, since not that many people shoot in these kinds of situations. Unusual travel photography tip number 5. Embrace the ugliness.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, of course, so this tip is really about shooting what you consider ugly, or perhaps what you wouldn't normally shoot. When I started out, it was all about this sort of imagery. Beautiful places, photogenic characters, and to be honest, I still much prefer to be around this sort of stuff, around what I consider beautiful. But I'll tell you why I think it's worth getting out of your comfort zone and not only photographing beauty. One subject matter that I consider incredibly ugly is Soviet architecture, especially these kinds of apartment blocks.
I grew up in one. I would have never considered photographing this sort of stuff in the beginning of my photographic journey. Over my recent travels, I've been seeing a lot of Soviet architecture in its ugliest stages. Dilapidated, forgotten.
Like where I am now, I feel compelled to photograph it. In a sense, this sort of thing has become my muse. I even try to find a beauty to it all sometimes.
Or I explore what I find weird or jarring, like when you have this ghastly, smoke-belching factory set against a beautiful mountain backdrop. I've extended the challenge to other subject matter that I'd never call beautiful. Sometimes the ugliness tells more of a story than the beauty, and it can be more evocative, more gripping, thought-provoking even.
By embracing and photographing what you would consider ugly, what you wouldn't usually shoot, you are expanding your creative horizons. You're adding variety to your work. You are also likely showing a different side of the places that you visit. And in our world, which is so full of stereotypes, this can be incredibly fascinating.
Unusual travel photography tip number 6. Be skeptical about local advice on places to go to.
This might seem counterintuitive, but hey, we are talking about unusual travel photography tips. First thing though, if it's a famous place that a local recommends you, this tip doesn't apply obviously. You're probably there to visit it anyway. Also, if you're asking something specific, then that's different. This is more about those cases when the enthusiastic local feels compelled to tell you, you have to see our church, our temple, the view of our village from the mountaintop. I'm sure that you have all had those cases, and it is very tempting to follow the local advice. What I mean when I say be skeptical is don't rush to follow the advice. Google the place. You can find photos of almost anything these days. See if it's your thing. If you can't find anything, then it really depends on what other plans you have. I have changed plans to follow local advice, and it has very rarely been worth it. The locals are rarely objective. Their places hold special values to them, and they might not have traveled much, so they have nothing to compare to. Also, they mostly try to recommend what they think is beautiful, what they're proud of. They have no idea what you're into. Like from a photographic perspective, I'm interested in these Soviet ruins. The sorts of places where I'm filming now, in these apartment blocks. But for the locals, these are sources of shame or just something really boring. No local ever recommended me to see something like this. So yeah, locals might know best about many things, but after following local advice almost religiously for many years, I have come to the conclusion that when it comes to advice on places of photographic interest, you have to be skeptical.
Unusual travel photography tip number 7. Aim to have the action on your doorstep.
Now, what do I mean by action? Well, it's whatever you came to photograph. So if you came to photograph street life in a city, ceremonies in a church or a temple, a fish market, whatever it is, you want to be close to where things are happening. Even if it means that you're paying more and your room is not as good as a place further away, it's worth it. The less you have to travel to your place of photographic interest, the less early you need to wake up, the less you have to rush, the less you have to worry about taking some crappy road at night. You can photograph really intensely, exhaust yourself, then rest in your room and do it all again. Staying even a bus ride or a taxi ride from the action can change the dynamics a lot. There are countless times that I never bothered going out again because I dreaded the drive, the traffic, or a really long walk. And I remember not wanting to shoot in the mornings because I needed to wake up way too early to get to where I wanted to be. I'm sure that many can relate. I've taken this idea of action on my doorstep even further. That's why I have my cars, and I've modified them to sleep in them. I'm obviously in my car now. I stayed the night in the car right next to this complex so that I wouldn't have to drive far. In other cases, I wanted to be right where the village's animals would come past in the morning. Or I wanted to photograph ancient ruins at night and to go to sleep after, not have to search for a hotel somewhere. You don't need a modified car, of course. You can camp or you can stay at the village. It's just about finding a way to be right there where the action is. Conclusion. So that is it for 7 unusual travel photography tips. I hope that you got something out of this video. I've shared my ideas that I know if you implement them will help you create photos that will make you stand out from the masses. And if you ask me, that is usually a good thing, or at least the beginning of something good. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, check out one of these videos. See you next time.